everybody, Kaylee here. I'm here at my studio, Back Pocket Recording Studio in Central Florida, and I'm just here today to tell you a few tips that have helped me record in the studio. So here's my video called A Few Tips on How to Record in a Studio Like a Pro. Tip number 1. When you come to the studio, make sure that you know your music so well that you really don't have to read it while you're in the session. So it's one thing to have your music up there on a music stand or even on your phone, which we'll mention cell phones later, as a confidence booster or just a lyric reference. That's totally fine, but make sure that when you come in that you know your music very well, because confidence is key. When you're recording in the studio, you want to be as confident as possible. That way you get the best take and the best performance so you can have the best project that you'll love for sure. Treat a studio session like the biggest gig you've ever had in your entire life as far as preparation, and I know that you'll definitely be happy with the result. Tip number 2, make sure you tune your instrument or warm up your voice or hands if you're a pianist or acoustic guitarist, bass player, you name it. Make sure that you're warmed up and you warm up your body and mind before you come into the studio. So as a vocalist and a pianist myself, I'll speak as a vocalist first, I know there is a limit to how much good takes or good singing I can do within one day for a studio session. So for me, I warm up about 10 to 15 minutes before I come into the studio, because I know then at that point I still have a few hours left of good takes. Some people can warm up for 30 to 45 minutes and still have a lot of juice left in their vocal cords. That's a funny way to say it, juice. But everybody's voice is different and you know yourself super well. So just make sure that you warm up to where you know is a good place for you, where you're not overworking your voice, so that way it doesn't give you less good takes or quality recording in the studio. And now as a pianist, for my hands, I always, before I go into the studio to record, will practice and warm up my hands and warm up my mind. If I am reading music for a studio session for a client that wants me to play for their project, I'll practice it. I will get my hands ready. I like to keep my studio kind of cold because it just feels good to me. In Florida here, it's kind of warm all the time, so I keep it cold in here. So I make sure that I get my hands warmed up and I make sure I do finger exercises. That way I'm ready to play and ready to go. I would also tune your instrument if you're a guitar player or a bass player or etc., orchestra player, anything like that. I would tune your instrument at home before you come. And then another tip is to tune before you start the session, and then people even recommend, and I've seen this as successful before too, tune before each take. Even if it's a quick just check up on your tuning, it'll make sure that everything is falling in line perfectly for your session, and that way you get a good sound, a good in tune, clean sound for your instrument every time. Tip number 3. When you book your studio session, make sure that you book with enough time. Sometimes people feel like in order to save money that they need to book less time, but this can really add to the pressure of a studio session. Recording in a studio is stressful for some people, for a lot of people actually, until you get a lot of practice or a good engineer that you're used to working with, and then it kind of feels more just like hanging out with a friend. But if you have less amount of time, or say like 2 or 3 hours, instead of doing 2 or 3 hours, go ahead and book that extra 4th hour to give yourself enough time. That way you're not rushed. Then you can listen back to your takes with your engineer and make sure you like every single piece of your performance. And then if you really don't love just a little part or portion of it, you can go back into the studio and retake it. Then you have a performance that you love. And I'm sure sound engineers, I myself charge by the hour. If you don't use the 4th hour, they won't charge you for it. Now every studio is different, every price structure is different, so I can't speak for everyone, but I have had clients book for a 4-hour block and only use 3, so I only charged them for 3. So just make sure you discuss that with your sound engineer, but always book more time. That way there's not added pressure or added speed, where if you really slowed down and took your time, you could get the best performance. Even if you have to wait a little bit to book your studio session, that way you have enough financially in order to afford it, it's always going to be worth it, because then you can have more time to prepare, and then you can even be more confident, like I was saying earlier in the tips, so you can have a better take and a better session. Tip number 4, always make sure that as a vocalist you have good mic placement. Now I know as a sound engineer, if I have a vocalist come in, I will always help them figure out the right height for the vocal mic, and I will always position the mics for an instrumentalist. However, a lot of times when a person is singing a song, it can have very different dynamics. So whenever you get closer up onto the microphone, about this far away, it can pick up those nice dynamics. Always take a little bit of a step back whenever you are recording a loud portion of the song, but make sure you don't step way too back, because the sound engineer is actually trying to find a good level that can handle all of the different dynamics in a song, and then we'll use something called compression to make the lows a little bit louder, the low volumes a little bit louder, and the higher volumes a little bit softer, so it'll compress the audio together where it's more even. So just make sure that you know in your music where you want to get really soft, so you can step a little bit closer to the mic. About this far away is how I would if I was really soft. And then I would step out about this far if I was going to do a very loud section. Tip number 5, always silence your cell phone. And we have a short little video that we made to show an example of what happens when you don't silence your cell phone. So take a look. Tip number 6, don't take yourself too seriously when you're in a studio session. I know I've definitely been in situations before where I completely vocally made a sound that I was not ready for, with my voice just cracking or something different. Don't take yourself too seriously. The sound engineer knows, they are probably a musician themselves, so they know how it goes. They know how nerves can affect someone. They even know how cold air in a studio can affect someone. So don't take yourself too seriously, and don't beat yourself up if you do make a mistake, because the studio is the best place to make a mistake, because then you can just run that section of the song again. Tip number 7, watch your self-talk. A lot of times clients can get in their heads. I know I've gotten in my head before, like, why can't I just get this one section right? It's very important how you talk to yourself in all areas of life, but even in the studio, you have to be confident in yourself and in your abilities, but also just give yourself grace if you do make a mistake, and don't berate yourself inside your head. And also just know that anyone that's in the control room, like the sound engineer, your producer, if you have friends and family come, they're all on your team. They all want to see you succeed and do well. So just know that everybody is rooting for you, and you should too in your mind, because it will actually enhance your overall performance. And here's my last tip, number 8. This is kind of a bonus tip. Make sure you get a good night's sleep before you come into the studio, because if you're tired mentally, it can really affect how fast your mind is able to execute those nuances that you want in your music, whether that's instrumentally or vocally. So just make sure you get well rested before you come into the studio the next day. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed my tips, and I hope you have a great day. Stay safe, everybody. Wash your hands, and just have a great rest of your week. Thanks. Bye.